Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes. We are with Mister Eclipse, our dark Dominator, level 18. About 5k to go to get to level 19 in our next couple of enhancement slots, and we are working for antimatter here. The view from the other side, so I think this is slowly getting us to the point where we're going to be transitioning to Paragon City, but I think there's another story arc after this, if I remember right. It's been a long time. How familiar are you with Arachnos? Well, I hope enough to fight them because I have no time to give you a history lesson on what they're about. I've just been given word that I'm supposed to deal with the Arachnos threat here in Metropolis. Okay, well, we know all about Arachnos, so we don't have to worry about that. We don't need the store because we have all of our inspirations that I've been using as our standard kit. And we'll go ahead and turn on stealth just in case I don't aggro anybody. And off we go to our next mission, and I hope you guys have been enjoying the summer. It is late July, and I was enjoying the summer pretty darn well until I logged into my work account to start working on one of my classes, and I found out that the bookstore screwed up my order and didn't put in the order for the textbook for my embryology class, and now it's too late to fix it, even though it was correct in March and April and May when I was checking it. So I had a very frustrating day arguing with them, and I don't think I'm going to have a textbook for that class, which is very frustrating. And there's like literally nothing I can do about it. All right. I don't think we need our haunts right now, so we will leave them until we find a more difficult set of enemies. Um, Actually, what I wanted to talk about today is, and I don't want to get too into the details of Dungeons and Dragons in particular because I don't really play Dungeons and Dragons anymore. Um, but one of the things that I saw, and again, I feel like the I'm not going to call out the specific post or the author of the specific post because I feel like that's a potentially controversial situation, right? There's a battle going on between some folks on one side and Wizards of the Coast on the other side, and I don't want to get too into the details, but as part of this thread of conversation that I was reading on one of the social media sites, the claim that the one person who's very frustrated with Wizards of the Coast made about the modern Dungeons and Dragons was that he said Dungeons and Dragons doesn't exist anymore except in name. Right? There's a game called Dungeons and Dragons, but it isn't Dungeons and Dragons, not even a little bit. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that, this sort of something in name only, right? And not from the perspective of uh, anything overly negative, but just how do we sort of define when something has been changed so much that it really no longer counts as the thing that it used to be, right? After all, City of Heroes has changed a lot since its original inception, but I would argue that despite all of those changes, it's still fundamentally the same game that I started playing back in 2004. And one of the ways I know that that's true is that I can pretty much still play it the way I played it in 2004, including using only SOs all the way through the character's life. I did that with Tiger Strike, so if you want to see that, you can, and it works just fine. I don't have, there's no problem with it. You can absolutely do that, and I, I showed how to do that in that entire series. And by the end of it, I think she was fighting plus threes, right? All with SOs, right? It was really not an issue, and I was able to play. Once she started gold side, but I was able to play once we got into Paragon City, all of the same story arcs that I always played. Things like the Wheel of Destruction and the Scroll Teleku and um, all of that stuff. So the game, you can still play the game very much the way I played it in 2004 and 5 when I first started playing the game before even City of Villains came out. You don't need the auction house, you don't need the arena, you don't need the PvP zones. You can play the game without all of that stuff if you want. You can play it without inventions, you can play it without salvage. I just auctioned or vended everything that dropped for Tiger Strike, and I was able to play it with absolutely no problem at all. We are on the clock here, huh? I don't know how I'm supposed to do it that fast. 4 minutes to deactivate the teleporter. Like I mean, I literally, I'm a Dominator. I can't go fast through the mission. This isn't a Stalker. So we may fail this. I just don't know. I didn't even realize we were on that much of a timer. But yeah, I can't just waltz past these guys. They'll faceplant me. So we have to kind of just go very methodically and slowly through, and if we fail, we fail. And whatever the consequence is, it is. But I can't afford to throw domination up there because there may be a boss. So I don't know. Yep, no, we will not succeed because I can't get past all these guys that fast. And I don't have my minions up to help me. So anyway, what this person was arguing is that Dungeons & Dragons doesn't exist anymore because the rules have changed so dramatically from how it was back when the game was first invented, that so much is different now that it's really not the same game. And I actually agree. It's not the same game. I mean, you can't... It doesn't play anything like the way Dungeons & Dragons originally played when I first learned how to play it. You don't... Like, people don't buy iron spikes and 10-foot poles and things like that anymore because you don't need them to play the game, right? There's no such thing as a save or die mechanic. That was a really important and critical part of Dungeons & Dragons, knowing that that function was there. And I don't know what happened with the teleporter, but we haven't failed the mission yet. Knowing that that feature was there made you play the game in a certain very cautious way, and you were much more strategic about what you did. You couldn't just burrow your way into a room and not be careful. You had to be careful about everything you did. Why am I not? Here we go. The way spells work is entirely different, right? Third edition, when it came along, it changed saving throws. It changed to hit rolls and how they work from, high armor class to low armor class, right? Like, in other words, ascending to descending armor class, right? It changed how the saving throws work. So you got like reflex saving throws and stuff like that instead of death saves and poison saves and so on and so forth. It changed how spellcasting works. So in old school Dungeons and Dragons, you didn't have spell slots. I remember somebody saying to me, well, it was the same thing. No, it wasn't it was totally different. Right? Yeah, you get the same number of spell slots probably at a given level for, say, wizards, who used to be called magic users. So they get the same kind of number of spell slots as the number of spells per level, but you don't have to pick a specific spell. So, for example, let's say you get 3 first-level spells. Magic Missile is a first-level spell. I think Sleep maybe is a first-level spell. I don't remember. Light was a first-level spell. Now it's a cantrip. So cantrips was something new to the game that they didn't have before. So you've got 3 first-level spells A, B, and C. And in modern versions of D&D, you get 3 spells. You have all 3 of them in your library, right? All 3 are prepared. And you have the ability to cast 3 magic missiles or 2 magic missiles and some other first level spell, or 1, 1, and 1, right? You can cast spell A, B, C, or AAB, or ABA, or ABC, or ACC, BCC, however you want to do it, right? But in old school D&D, it didn't work that way. In old school D&D, you had to say, I'm going to memorize 1 magic missile, 1 read magic, and 1 light, right? And then if you didn't need the light spell, you could not use that quote-unquote spell slot to cast Magic Missile. So you had to know ahead of time how many of each spell you were going to cast. And there was there were a lot fewer instances of what I call the blaster type of magic user in Dungeons and Dragons, right? In the original D&D from the 70s. You didn't, because you wouldn't be foolish enough. Fireball's a third level spell. Let's say you can cast 3 third level spells. Nobody would have been stupid enough to memorize Fireball 3 times, because then they wouldn't be able to do any other third level spells, right? And that would be pretty dumb. You'd memorize 1 copy of Fireball, which you would use when you needed an area effect attack, and then you'd memorize a copy of some other kind of a spell that does more kinds of controlling, and then you'd memorize some other kind of a spell that's like a utility spell, and you'd have 1 of each, right? And so you would not be casting 3 fireballs in a single day. The only way to do that would be if Fireball was the only spell you have. And nobody would have been crazy enough to have Fireball be the only spell they have, because if you don't need Fireball, you have nothing, right? So you had to be smart enough to have several different spells learned, memorized at a given time. And the only way you would memorize 3 of one spell would be if you absolutely were sure you were going to need that spell in triplicate, right? Because you had scouted the area. This is why we scouted areas very carefully. You scouted the area. You found out whatever it was that you needed. And then, having scouted that area and found that out, you prepped the spells you thought you were going to need. Nobody does that anymore, because you can just memorize Fireball and Melf's Acid Arrow and whatever the other third level spell is that you want, and just use them as many times as you want up to the number of spell slots you have. Right? You don't have to worry about it. You can do as much of the different spells as you want, right? And then of course you have cantrips, the 0 cost spells, and they took light and they made it a cantrip, and they made having illumination in the dungeon, which was one of the most important aspects of Dungeons and Dragons in the 1970s and early 80s. They took that and they made it a non-issue. Nobody even bothers to pay any attention to how much light you have around the party anymore. Dark vision. Everybody's got dark vision, and if they don't have dark vision, it doesn't matter, because you can just cast light on somebody's sword over and over and over again, so everybody can see. So being able to see stuff is no longer a thing in the game. They've taken encumbrance out of the game. It used to be that you had to count every copper and gold piece that you had. It all counted. And you could not just carry indefinite amounts of gold pieces out of the dungeon. And how you got the gold pieces and the silver pieces out of the dungeon was a problem-solving thing for the players to come up with. I remember Matt Colville talking about how there were DMs who would put, the dragon, let's say, has 1,000 gold pieces, but he's worth of treasure, but he's sitting on a pile of copper, and instead of 1,000 gold pieces, he's got 100,000 copper pieces, and maybe the party can only carry 10,000 total between them. So they want to get the treasure out of the dungeon, but they can't get it all at once. So how are they going to do it? Right? They have to figure out. Are we going to send somebody back to town to get like a pack mule? How do we split the party up? What happens if they get attacked on the way? What happens if somebody comes and tries to loot this dungeon while you guys are gone? How are we going to work this out? It was a problem to solve for the players. Guys, it wasn't the GM being mean. We loved stuff like this. Now, I do understand that not everybody likes it, right? But when you take all of that stuff out, you take encumbrance out, you take the save or die mechanics out, you take the way spells work and you completely change them, you add cantrips to the game so that it no longer it doesn't matter anymore whether you have torches or not. Nobody even carries torches. Somebody's got the light cantrip. We'll just use that anytime we need it, right? That changes the game to something fundamentally different, right? It's not the same game. You don't need ball bearings. You don't need iron spikes and hammers. You don't need 10-foot poles anymore. At the end of an adventuring day, you can just sleep for 8 hours and you get completely healed up from 1 hit point to 1,000 if you had that many, right? Instead of old school D&D where you healed up like 1 hit point a day. I think my best friend and I upped it to 1 hit point per hour of rest so that you could get back 8 hit points in an 8-hour rest. I don't think we did that at the beginning, but I think once we hit like 3rd or 4th level, when we had a lot of hit points to get back, we said, okay, well that kind of makes it a little faster, but it's still not like if you had 35 hit points, you go down to 1, you don't get it all back in 1 rest. It would take a long time, and it used to be specified it had to be like you could get it back a little faster with bed rest in town, not in the dungeon. Right, and so these were all problem-solving things, right? This was all a problem for us to solve. It wasn't bad. It wasn't the GM and the rule makers being mean. That's a misconception from the people who play D&D now who don't like solving problems and playing the game that way. And because they don't like playing the game that way, they assume nobody would like playing the game that way. And therefore, they took it all out of the game, right? And anybody who says they liked it, well, you just don't like fun, right? Like, I actually have this friend who likes that old stuff, tries to put that into his games, and when he tries to push for having that more like the old school way of playing, he is literally was literally accused by his old game group of hating fun. No, he didn't hate fun. He has fun playing D&D rather than whatever the game is that they're calling D&D that we play now. Right? So many mechanics have changed that I do not think that it is at all representative of what the original D&D game was like. Now, some people may say that's a great thing. The original D&D game stinks. Well, okay, I understand if people believe that, but then why is Wizards of the Coast calling the game D&D? Why don't they call it something else, right? I mean, after all, the guys at Kobold Press weren't totally happy with D&D, so they made up whatever it is, Black Flag, whatever that game is going to be called, right? And the Critical Role people, they made up their own game called Daggerheart. And there's tons of other games. There's Dragonbane, and there's Forbidden Lands, and there's Savage Worlds. There are all these other games that have mechanics that I would agree are way better than the mechanics of old school D&D. I mean, I abandoned old school D&D for Champions and Rollmaster because I like those mechanics better. But I wouldn't argue that if you started playing what is called Fantasy Hero, right, which is hero system in fantasy, champions in a fantasy setting, and you called it D&D, it would not just simply be another edition of D&D. It's a totally different game. And I think 5th edition and the upcoming 6th edition, or whatever they're going to call it, those games are not D&D. I think they're too different to really consider them iterations of D&D, right? There's so many things that they don't have that were fundamental aspects of Dungeons and Dragons, like having to pay attention to rations, having to pay attention to light in the dungeon, having to pay attention to traps very carefully, right? I mean, one of the things that disappointed me in 5th edition was when I was using sort of the published traps, right? How weak traps are. They're just like, even if you miss them, I put traps in that even if the players missed, and these are traps out of the books like Tasha's Cauldron and stuff, even when the players missed them and didn't detect them, it did some hit points of damage and they just healed it right up. Because the cleric just had to memorize, prep one healing spell, Cure Wounds. And then he could use any of his spell slots with it and do any number of dice up to the spell slots of healing with it. He can use a level 1 spell slot, level 2, level 3. He can upcast it, right? Whereas in the old days, there was Cure Light Wounds, Cure Moderate Wounds, Cure heavy wounds, cure serious wounds, right? I can't remember all the names for them. I feel like I hear a glowy. I can't remember all the names for them, but yeah, the cure wounds spells where there were multiple ones, and you had to memorize them separately, and you had to memorize instances of them. So if you have 5 first level spells, right, and 3 third level spells, and first level spells, and your first level spell is cure light wounds, and your third level spell is cure whatever it is, moderate wounds. You had to memorize them separately, and you had to figure out how many of them you were going to memorize. So if you were going to really focus on healing as your cleric, it might be all you could do, right? If you're going to be healing 3 or 4 different characters of several dozen wounds that they got from a trap as a cleric, that's going to be all you can do with your spells. You won't be casting something like Spirit Weapon, which they didn't have. You won't be casting Divination and all this other stuff because you had chosen to memorize so many instances of cure wounds, right? And so, I mean, and we've leveled up. That's pretty good. What the players had to do back then was think very carefully about what they were going to do. Okay, we only have 1 cure light wounds, 1 cure moderate, and 1 cure serious wound left before we rest. Or that's all we ever have, right? Because the cleric has to do other things. And so if that's true, okay, then we're not going to use the cure spell unless we're pretty sure somebody's going to go down if we don't use it, right? Because we don't want to waste it. Because it's the only one we've got for the day. And so we're going to use that when somebody's got 1 hit point left, right? Also, by the way, when you got to 0 hit points, you flat out died. It was much harder to resurrect people, right? So it's such totally different games that I agree with the person who said you cannot consider modern D&D from 3rd edition on. You cannot consider them to actually be Dungeons and Dragons because they're so wildly different from the original game that it's basically a totally different game with the same name and the same sort of feel to it. But it's not Dungeons and Dragons. And anybody who wants to play a game that is stylistically and mechanistically like the original game has to go back and play AD&D or play one of these so-called OSR games, because those games are, I mean, the reason they're like that is because they're designed to play a lot more like old school D&D than modern games do, although most of them really don't. They're really not D&D, right? I think like Castles and Crusades and Swords and Wizardry are very, very similar to like Basic Expert set. But I don't know if anything's really like AD&D. Personally, I like Basic Expert set better. I think it's simpler. It was easy to learn and very easy to master. And it was true D&D, right? It had all of the parts to the game that you would expect. It just had fewer options for you to do as a player, for your characters. And that made it a little easier to handle as a player and as a GM. So yeah, now I would say City of Heroes is still City of Heroes. So one of the reasons I'm not interested in Champions 6th edition is because I feel like both 5th and 6th edition really aren't Champions the way it used to be. They changed the game from being Champions with the other games thrown in as an overlay, the hero system, to being the hero system, and Champions is just a source book for the hero system. Now, Savage Worlds did that with Deadlands, and maybe that would bother me if I had started playing Deadlands when it was Deadlands, period. But I didn't start playing Deadlands until Savage Worlds Adventure Edition had already come out, so that doesn't bother me. However, I don't feel like a lot of people feel like Deadlands of today isn't Deadlands. I think there are people who complained about the changes to the setting, like the timeline and stuff. But I don't know if anybody who's complained about changes to the actual rules. But I could be wrong about that. I do remember when the guys at the Wildcard channel were playing, were reviewing the beta of Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. Dom Zook saying, "I've never seen a game put out a new edition that is so completely revised and yet feels so exactly like the original game, that it feels just like Savage Worlds Deluxe and base Savage Worlds." And he said they basically said it's awesome, and I agree. I really like Savage Worlds Adventure Edition, but that's how I learned Savage Worlds, and I don't know if I would feel that way if I had learned it under the original Deadlands or something like that. So yeah, so what are your guys' comments? Do you agree that if a game has the same name but changes enough, it's really no longer that game? Do you think D&D has hit that threshold? Destroy the Arachnos bomb. Well, that must be it. Is there a boss? No, but we'll go ahead and dominate. We may as well. Why don't you fight some pets? Maybe they'll shoot the bomb for me too, because they do some pretty good damage. Hey, they are drawing a little bit of aggro there. Nice. I guess if I throw them in far enough, the pets will draw the aggro for me. What are these things anyway? Just pet class? And are they attacking the bomb? I hope so. Yeah, they are, I think. Yeah, they're doing some damage to it. That's good. But I mean, I think that, when games change editions and I go, I'm not playing that anymore. Like, for instance, Rollmaster is a great example. There is a new edition of Rollmaster out currently, and it just came out, and I was like, oh, maybe I should get it. And I was reading the reviews, and a lot of people are saying it's Rollmaster in name only. The people who are involved in it were not, I guess, involved in the original game. They do not have the spirit of Rollmaster here. They've taken away a lot of the things that are Rollmaster, right? Like the large tables per weapon of how the types of damage, the crit charts, the way skill development works. Like, I know a lot of people think that was overly complicated and maybe didn't like it, but those are the things I loved about Rollmaster. And if you take them away, then it's not the same game. Okay, you think the PPD would be able to handle Arachnos, or that Marchand would be given orders to handle it, but who has to do it? We do. Yeah, you're a whiner. What bomb in the tunnels? No, do not tell me that, ugh. Not in the tunnels. I need those tunnels. And do you have any idea how badly it's going to hamper my schedule if these bombs go off? The destined ones emerge. I've got a location on the bombs, Mr. Eclipse. Now, from what I've gathered, they're much more powerful than what Arachnos should have. This is not surprising. What's also not surprising is Praetor Barry finding out about what I'm investigating. One thing led to another. Now I've been ordered to recover those bombs so that I can investigate them further. Of course, he isn't going to do the research. Why not? He just barges into my business. Okay, where are they located? And he says they're under the tunnels. Okay, how are we doing on time? 30 minutes. All right, let's do one more mission, and hopefully this won't be as long as the last one. But yeah, unfortunately, guys, and I don't know if anybody has noticed this, our missions are longer. Now, some of this is because of Goldside, but some of it is just, look, as a Dominator at this level, you cannot whip through missions. So now here's the question. I only had 5 minutes to deal with the teleporter. I didn't deal with it in 5 minutes, and nothing happened. Why'd they bother with a countdown? Mission design. Why did you bother with a countdown if, when I didn't succeed at the countdown, the mission just went off as normal and nothing happened? I don't know. Now, maybe the bomb in the tunnels is because I didn't get there in time, but I doubt it. Oh, darn, we leveled up. Hang on, hang on. We leveled up. Let's go get our level up. All right, let me pause here. I'll bring you back when we're leveling up. All right, we're here with Battle Maiden, and we are going to train up to a new level of power. Let's finish health. Um, we're going to want to do haunts. We're going to want to recharge, gather shadows. Huh. I need everything. Uh, let's try possess, because we definitely use that a lot. Do I have any enhancements I can use on these guys? Oh, I got a bunch of enhancements. Can I use any of them? I can only use science. We don't have any science. Okay. Let's head back to the mission, and I'll bring you back. Alright, guys, we're heading back into the mission. And now we will head in and see if we can stop these 3 bombs. At level 19, guys, we have 21,000 XP to go to get to level 20. And my recollection is, that we leave gold side and go to the blue side around level 20. I guess one of the things that I would use as a measure of whether the game has changed so much that it's really just that game in name only, would be, can you play it the way you played the old game, right? So, for example, with City of Heroes, there have been a lot of changes. They have the pay-to-win vendor, right? And they have the from launch. They have the auction house. They have the arena and the PvP zones. They have gold side. They have the villain side. They have things like enhancement sets and all the rest of it. But you can actually ignore most of that and still play the game the way I played it in 2004 when it first came out. And so I feel like it's still City of Heroes, even though it's not the same team of people running it and stuff. I feel like it's still City of Heroes specifically because I can still play it the way I used to play it, right? And defense buffs still work the same way, and recharge still works mostly the same way. Can you do permahasten? No. But they stopped that a long time ago, right? It still plays a lot, like, pretty much exactly the way City of Heroes used to play. And if I slot my characters, like if I make up a scrapper and I slot it the way I slotted my scrapper in 2004, you could still play it. And you could still, if you don't change the difficulty setting, you can still whip through white cons no problem in the 30s and 40s. Exactly the way I played it in 2004. This is stupid. It's a bomb and I'm blowing it up. Is that what's going on? Oh, okay. You managed to disarm the bomb. It's hard to believe Arachnos really made something like this. Okay, so it's just a clicky. Can you play D&D the way you always played it in 3rd, 4th, 5th edition? Actually, no. Right? It doesn't. You can't run it the way you ran it. Like, I learned the hard way, right? I designed some of my early dungeons the way you would design dungeons back in the day, because that's what I knew. Okay, and I wasn't really familiar with all the ways in which Dungeons and Dragons had changed. Yes, I read the rulebook and stuff, but it's one thing to read the rules, it's another thing to actually play it. And, oh boy. Over aggroed. Let's get some pets helping me. Man, I'm getting killed here. Um, so I tried making uh, dungeons and designing challenges, traps, and stuff like that pretty much the way I had designed them in the past. And because low-level characters still aren't that powerful and can't do that much, the first dungeon or two I made up was okay, right? They worked all right because the real differences in the way D&D characters operate um, under modern D&D versus old school D&D really didn't manifest quite as much. But by the time we hit the 4th level dungeon, I realized, oh man, it was way too easy, and the challenges just weren't challenges, and the traps and stuff that I thought would be a big deal were just nothing. Right? I remember the first time I used poison, and I realized poison doesn't do anything. If you fail a poison save, all you do is have like disadvantage until you take a long rest, and that's it, right? And I was like, are you kidding me? How can it be that easy to overcome? Yep. Didn't realize that was going to happen, right? And I remember I gave them some kind of like a +1 scythe or something that I assumed they were going to sell, and they kept it because like +1 is so much bigger of a deal in 5th edition than it is in the older versions. I mean, it wasn't a big deal at all in 3rd edition, right? And so, yeah, it took me a while to calibrate, but as the players leveled up, I started to realize that almost none of the things that I had thought would be challenges to them were challenges. I had to completely change how I was doing things. I mean, I set up a mystery that once they got to higher level, they could just use magic spells to solve the mystery. And I had to come up with all kinds of contortions to prevent that. Because otherwise it would have just spoiled the whole story. Like, they were supposed to be using their own brain to figure stuff out. And they didn't need to because they had spells that would handle it for them. And some of those spells exist in old school D&D, but again, as we've discussed, you probably wouldn't memorize them because it would blow an entire spell cast for the day for you. Whereas a spell like that you can just you can pick as one of your prepared spells and just burn, like, and use the slots on cure wounds if you don't need to use that spell today. So you can take it. It doesn't waste anything, and nobody dies because of it. It's so much easier to take these spells that I think that I wasn't ready for that, right? For the fact that they were perfectly willing to, this cleric was willing to waste, what is it, sending, right? Where you can talk to somebody at a great distance, and he would prep it every day because it was the same level as some other spell that he used a lot. And at the end of the day, if he hadn't used that spell slot, he would just cast it just like for freaking fun. And he would communicate with somebody in another dimension or all the way across the continent. And I was totally unprepared for, not just for the fact that sending exists, because I had seen it used on Critical Role. I knew it existed, but I was totally unprepared for the idea that you would prepare a spell just for the heck of it, right? And not worry about it because you could use other spells in that spell slot. And so they were preparing all these spells that I don't think anybody in their right mind in AD&D would prepare unless you really knew you were going to use it, right? You're in town for the day. You're not going on a dungeon adventure. You can memorize and use sending. But you're not going to memorize it while you're wandering around adventuring because that's a 4th level or whatever spell that you could use, like Ice Storm or something instead. And also, I was unprepared for how many times they blasted out fireball, fireball, fireball all the time. Like, it was used in every combat, sometimes in almost every round. They would just move around in such a way that they could just blast fireball at the enemies. They opened up combats with fireball, usually two, because the cleric could do it and the sorcerer could do it. It's another one I wasn't really ready for. All of the non-clerical spells, quote unquote non-cleric spells that a cleric can use based on their god. So he was Apollo was the god of light, so he could use firebolt or fireball. And so yeah, the cleric could do fireball a couple times a day. The sorcerer at one point could do fireball several times a day. And there were times when they were like, I had to learn, like, open battlefields are horrible, right? Because they could just blast fireballs, and there's two or three, they could do it just indiscriminately. It just wiped the battlefield. And that's not something you would do in AD&D because the cleric couldn't do it, and the magic user wasn't going to have two or three or four fireballs memorized because that would have been all of his third level spells, and he has other spells that he might want to use, like Stone Skin or Bark Skin or whatever, right? Just like first level, you're not going to just have Magic Missile because you might need Shield. And you might memorize one instance of Magic Missile, one instance of Shield, and one instance of Light. And you can't just throw Light whenever you want. You can't just cast Shield in every battle, right? And so I was really kind of unprepared for that as a GM until I had seen it for a while. And I definitely could not run 5th edition after like second level, and even second level to some degree. I could not run it the way I ran it in the 80s, right? D&D in the 80s. It didn't play the same. Therefore, personally, I don't consider it to be the same game. It's called D&D. But the experience that my group had in all three of our games that we played, not just me as GM, but with my best friend and with the other guy GMing, the one who had played the cleric in my game, the experience we had was nothing like the experience that I had in 7th, 8th, ninth grade. And it's not just because we were kids. The game is different. It plays differently. It plays at a different pace, a different speed. Combat is very different. Combat takes so much longer in 5th edition. It's over much faster in 1st edition. Because you don't have that many hit points. You can't do that many. You only do one thing around. I drew my sword. Okay, that's your turn. Next guy. I move. Okay, that's your turn. Next guy. I attack. Okay, that's your turn. Okay, the goblins go. This one moves. This one draws a sword, and this one shoots at you. You only made, already we're in round 2. 5 minutes. Whole battle is over in 20 minutes. 5th edition, sometimes it was an entire session for a battle. You never had that in AD&D, at least not in the single-digit levels, and you did in 5th edition. So even there, I had to learn not to stock the dungeon with so much crap, because like a 5th edition dungeon, if you made it as big as like the Keep on the Borderlands, it would take you years to do that, just because of how much stuff there is to fight and how long every 5th edition battle takes. So I don't feel like they're the same game. Now my best friend would say it's better now. He likes it better now, and that's fine. You like whatever 5e is better than Dungeons and Dragons. So did I. I mean, I liked Rollmaster better. I loved Rollmaster, the original. I like Champions better. I like Savage Worlds better. There's a lot of games I like better than AD&D. I like Basic Expert better than AD&D. Okay, but I'm not going to sit here and say Savage Worlds is D&D. I'm not going to sit here and say Pathfinder is D&D, and I'm not going to sit here and say that 5th edition is truly D&D. Yeah, they bought the rights to it. It was like Amazon bought the rights to Comixology because they couldn't compete with it, right? They had their Kindle. They were trying to do comics on the Kindle, and everybody was buying stuff from Comixology instead of Kindle because Comixology's app was great and Kindle stunk. So what did Amazon do? They offered millions of dollars to the guys at Comixology. They bought them out. They said nothing will change. And then basically little by little they migrated it over, and now all you can do is get it on a Kindle. I don't think Comixology even exists anymore. If it does, it's been completely consumed by the Kindle environment, right? Amazon couldn't compete, so they bought it. They still called it Comixology, and now it's gone, right? And Wizards of the Coast, instead of making up their own game to compete with D&D, they bought it, called their game D&D, and then 3rd edition D&D, whatever that is not Dungeons and Dragons. And all the ones since have been tweaks on 3rd edition, not really tweaks on original D&D. At least that's my opinion. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes.